Okay, this is historian Frank P. Marone Jr. of Gettysburg Historic Walking Tours. And today we are going to look at the Abraham Trostle Farm here in the Gettysburg National Military Park. Now, the Trostle Farm was owned by Peter Trostle, in whom we've done a video on in the past. You'll want to go back and watch our Peter Trostle Farm video. And he leased this farm to his son, Abraham Trostle, for a period of 15 years in the year 1849. Now, the farm itself likely dates back to between about 1820, 1830-ish. His son, Abraham, his wife, Catherine, and their 9 children occupied this farm during the battle, thus the name, the Abraham Trostle Farm. It was a 134-acre farm, which included a new frame house, brick barn, corn crib, wagon shed, spring house, and a brick smokehouse. Now, when the battle started on July 1st, 1863, the Trostles were abruptly forced away from their home during the fighting. They left their dinner on the table, which later was enjoyed by General Dan Sickles' staff. Like many of their other neighbors around Gettysburg, the Trostles returned back here to this house after the battle to find most of their belongings looted or destroyed. The Trostle house was used as a field hospital, and in 1863 it consisted of 7 rooms and a basement. Now, this particular building here is controversial because if you look up in the rafters there, it looks like there's a shell. However, this building actually was under construction during the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863, as photographs will show, and wasn't as in its completed state as you see today. So most likely there was a shell that was there for years that was put there almost like a fake battle wound. Now, Abraham Trostle's wife, Catherine, filed a damage claim with the United States government. She claimed that there were 16 dead horses near the house and over 100 dead horses on the farm. In fact, this farm had more dead horses on it than any other spot on the Gettysburg battlefield. She also claimed that the following items were destroyed: hay, oats, wheat, garden vegetables, quilts, carpet, pillows, bridle, post, and timber. Unfortunately, the United States government did not compensate the Trostle family for their losses that were sustained here during the Battle of Gettysburg. And in January of 1899, the Trostles sold the farm to the United States government at a price of $4,500. On this video series today, we're going to talk a little bit, as we have, about Abraham and Peter Trostle. We're going to talk about the 9th Massachusetts Battery under the command of John Bigelow. We're going to talk about Major General Dan Sickles and his actions around this farm with his troops, and of course, the Sickles witness tree, which is one of several witness trees on the Gettysburg battlefield. This farm was basically in no man's land on July 2nd, 1863, and took the brunt of Barksdale's charge all around and in between the several buildings which I spoke about earlier. It is one of the deadliest spots on any battlefield anywhere. Now, the witness tree, which we're looking at now, is a swamp oak. It sits near the Trostle farm across the street from the barn, and it actually was a mature tree in 1863 and is sometimes called the Sickles witness tree due to the fact that General Sickles set up his camp and headquarters near this tree when he was wounded on July 2nd, 1863, which we'll talk about soon. Bugler Charles Reed actually drew a sketch of Major General Daniel E. Sickles and his men gathered under this tree on July 2nd of 1863. Not long after that, Sickles' men were slaughtered by Confederate troops under the command of General William Barksdale of Mississippi, and the general lost his leg due to an artillery shell. The upright cannon that you see in front is actually the spot of Sickles' headquarters. As on every spot on the battlefield, when you see an upright cannon tube, it marks the headquarters of a general here at the Gettysburg National Military Park. And this tree, which is close to 200 years old, is a living witness to the battle. One of several here at the Gettysburg National Military Park. Now, the 9th Massachusetts Battery fought a desperate last stand on the farm. It was to be their first battle under the command of Captain John Bigelow. They moved their troops in this direction, and he suffered severe wounds to his side and hand during the battle here at the Trostle farm. Reportedly, troops took cover in the Trostle buildings, waiting for the ranks of the rebel army to get closer. As enemy troops approached over the knoll, the 9th Massachusetts Battery opened fire on them. The Confederates continued their advance on the farm, and the battery was trapped by the 21st Mississippi. The rebels then began shooting the horses who were still strapped to their harnesses. The reasoning behind this was so that the cannons could not be pulled out. The 9th Massachusetts Battery continued the fight, and in the end, the remaining survivors fled, leaving behind their guns, limbers, the wounded, and dead, both men and horses. During this action, the 9th Massachusetts Battery lost 5 of its 6 guns, and reportedly 80 of their 86 horses. Later on, their guns were regained by Union troops. And this is the monument to the 9th Massachusetts Battery. I do want to point out that the cannon that sits next to this is very interesting, because soldiers would tend to name their guns. And this particular gun that we're going to look at was named Cora. And actually, if you walk behind it, you will see Cora painted on the backside of the cannon tube. This is one of those secrets of the battlefield that not many people know about. One of the most amazing quotes was, "We fought with our guns until the Rebs put their hands on them," wrote Private David Brett. "The bullets flew thick as hailstones. It is a miracle that we were not all killed." The victorious Mississippians swept past the Trostle buildings toward Cemetery Ridge as they splashed across Plum Run. And you'll notice up here one of the Confederate cannonballs that struck the Abraham Trostle barn. As the rebels passed these buildings, an officer spied another Union battery, the 5th U.S., unlimbering their guns on a knoll 100 yards ahead. With a little encouragement, the soldiers rushed headlong, surprised the artillerymen before they could load the guns. The others scattered, including the drivers, who took the horse teams with them to deprive the Southerners on an easy way to remove their gun. The 21st Mississippi, under Barksdale, successfully reached the now open Union Center. Their comrades in General Barksdale's brigade were still behind them. Now, we're going to walk inside the barn here, and you'll see some paintings on the wall. This was actually a modern painting in the 1960s. It was painted in the snow. And this is the original stonework in the building and the rafters in the building. And I'm going to walk over toward the entrance to the barn here. And there are several interesting rock carvings that are on the wall of the Abraham Trostle barn. And most likely these are either former tenants or people, early visitors to the battlefield who carved name in the rock. I don't believe it has anything to do with the actual owners of the barn. We're going to zoom in here toward this one stone here, and you're going to see HLT. Now, I'm not sure exactly what that stands for, but I'm sure the T stands for Trostle. Below it, there's another interesting one that just says SXX. But again, these are, there's an H there on a brick. These are interesting things that the common visitor to Gettysburg doesn't see or even know about. That if you just look around a little bit here, it's interesting what you can find. Now back to the battle on July 2nd as we walk outside the side of the barn. Though the 21st Mississippi had successfully reached the now open Union Center, their comrades in General Barksdale's brigade were still behind them, stalled along Plum Run, exhausted and disorganized. If they moved quickly enough, the Union line would be cut in half. But the worn-out Mississippians under Barksdale remained in the cover of Plum Run, despite pleas and threats from the fiery Barksdale. Union reinforcements soon arrived and charged into the valley, driving out those men who sought refuge among Plum Run. One soldier recalled passing General Barksdale, leaning against his horse, pale and weak. Blood showed on his chest and left boot, torn and bloodied by a cannon shot. In the confusion that followed, the general was left behind on the battlefield. And I did a video a few years ago called General Barksdale's Charge at Gettysburg. You also want to go back and watch that video too. It's very, very interesting. And then we're going to walk around back toward the front of the barn and take another look at the Confederate cannonball hole in the front of the barn under the diamonds. As to Barksdale, later that evening, a detail from the 14th Vermont discovered Barksdale and carried him to a Union hospital where his wounds were pronounced mortal. "I have never regretted the steps I have taken," he said to one of his rescuers from the 14th Vermont. "I do not regret my steps now, and it was hard to leave my friends, wife, and children. I do not regret giving my life in a cause that I believe may be right. May God watch over and care for my dear wife, my boys, and God be a father to them." And they were some of the last words that General Barksdale ever gave. We're back here in the front of the barn. We just zoomed in on the cannonball hole. And as we walk around the bank barn side of the barn, I want to talk a little bit about the actions of Dan Sickles. Major General Daniel Sickles, a former politician, senator from New York, used the farm as his headquarters after he advanced his 3rd Army Corps to the line of the Emmitsburg Road on July 2nd of 1863. Now, Sickles was originally placed in a portion of a line that he did not like near Little Round Top. He disobeyed a direct order from his commanding officer and moved his men to the area that we're zoomed in on beyond my car there, up on the high point of the ridge, known as the Peach Orchard, where he formed a salient or a V position. This position on July 2nd, 1863 was very deadly and was assaulted by General James Longstreet's troops. Between 45 to 50% of Sickles' division was completely destroyed as they swept back here through the Trostle farm. On July 2nd of 1863, Major General Dan Sickles was seriously wounded in the leg near the Trostle barn. In a moment, we'll go over and take a look at the monument that marks this very spot where his leg was nearly torn off by a Confederate shell. Now, as the Union troops retreated from the Peach Orchard, their goal was to make it to Cemetery Ridge, and the path of their retreat was unfortunately through the Abraham Trostle farm. Most of the batteries were able to reach the ridge on Cemetery Ridge. Of course, the 9th Massachusetts Battery, which we took a look at earlier, wasn't. They were left behind to cover the retreat of these Union soldiers. While atop of his horse, Major General Daniel Sickles was struck in the leg by an artillery shot. And that's right here where this monument is. He was removed by his staff, calmly smoking a cigar, as not to panic his troops. Whatever controversies Daniel Sickles has, no one can deny the fact that he was an extremely brave man. From this point, he was then carried behind the Abraham Trostle barn, right about in the footsteps that we are walking now. Now, of course, the Confederates were firing artillery and bullets and everything in this direction. So getting behind the barn was a positive. It would shield them from this fire. But behind this barn was seen a large boulder in which he was placed behind on the ground to shield him totally from any artillery or gunfire. This was a triage point, and it was here also that the decision was made to remove Dan Sickles to another place, a home nearby in town of Gettysburg, where his leg would be amputated. And this is the boulder, and I've placed a flag on the ground where Dan Sickles was laying for protection. Of course, he was later taken to a nearby farm where his leg was amputated. The limb was saved, and he would go visit it a lot after the war. And today, it is preserved at the Walter Reed Medical Center near Washington, D.C. This has been a video on the Abraham Trostle Farm, and I am historian Frank P. Marone, Jr.